Good morning, everybody. As we trickle in, I'm going to pass out a handout. Keep enjoying your breakfast and your conversation. You're quite welcome. Morning. How are y'all?
Good morning.
Good to see you this morning. Hello, friends. There's 3 of them for y'all. Morning. How are y'all? Good to see you. Glad you're here. How Virginia Tech do yesterday? They play yesterday? Okay, I didn't see the score. All right. There's several for that table. Hey!
Good morning.
Good. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm so glad to be with you today. I make announcements about other classes, not because I'm trying to run you away, but just so you'll know what's happening at the 10 o'clock hour. The Inquirers class, Elliot West, begins a 2-week series on church history. And I try to tell the Inquirers class, look, church history, you're going to think, I don't want to go to that one. It's funny, every single time we have the Inquirers class, I always ask, what's your favorite class? And everyone always says church history. That's always their favorite. Because of Elliot, of course. If you know Elliot West, the professor of history and teacher, he's a gifted man. So if you, when we're praying, if you want to slip out, I will not be offended. I kind of want to slip out too. Also, in addition to the usual practicing presence contemplative group that meets in the library and the parenting class upstairs, because it's the last Sunday of the month, the Let's Get Acquainted group meets in Sarah's office. Let's Get Acquainted is hosted by some regulars at St. Paul's for some people who are new to St. Paul's to kind of help orient you in whatever way is helpful, whether it's to our worship, to our physical space, to the ministries and programs. So if you're ever just hungry to get to know some folks and to make those connections, Let's Get Acquainted on the last Sunday of the month is a good opportunity to do that. But let's talk about theology of place today. Before we do, may I ask for a volunteer who would run the microphone around the room for us? Elizabeth said she'll do that. Thank you. It's like the same joke every time. It's not funny. Yeah, I'll pay for that later. Anyway, but let's start with a prayer, and you'll see on the handout and on the screen a prayer at the top of the screen. Let me zoom in so we can see it. Let's pray this prayer. It's from the Book of Common Prayer. And it's for agriculture, which isn't a perfect fit for today, but there are some connections with what we'll talk about. So let's pray this prayer out loud together. Almighty God, we thank you for making the earth fruitful so that it might produce what is needed for life. Bless those who work in the fields, give us seasonable weather, and grant that we may all share the fruits of the earth, rejoicing in your goodness, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Take a look at where we've been and where we're headed. Last week we talked about the land of promise, promised land, sometimes called the Holy Land. We talked about what is the nature of that promise and who gets to determine whether the land is promised to someone and in what way it is promised. So a lot of difficult theological as well as political and human wrestling to be done. Today we're going to talk about holy ground, by which I mean the dirt, the earth underneath us, and what makes some places, some dirt, more holy than others. Next week, we're going to talk about the Lord's house, meaning the temple, also by extension the church, but we're going to talk particularly about those sanctified holy places, places to which we might make pilgrimage. Then we're going to talk about homecoming, the end of exile, and what it's like to come back into the land We kind of take a break for 1 week. Chief Standing Bear of the Osage Nation will be with us for a Tippy lecture on Saturday night and Sunday morning. I hope you will mark your calendars. It's going to be fabulous. And some of the topics that Chief Standing Bear will speak on are related to this. That might not surprise you. And then last, we'll look at someplace new. But let me start with some general questions for discussion to get kind of our minds and our hearts and our mouths working. I'm curious, in your experience, are some places holier than others? Why or why not? Like, do you think that, instinctively or thoughtfully, philosophically, are some places holier than others? And if so, what makes them holy? And if not, why not? Ray, let's start there. And if you've got a question, remember to raise your hand so that the microphone can come to you. Yes, sir.
For me, the answer is yes. There's just some places where something hits you that it's special about it.
Yeah. Hits you, meaning the person or perhaps people or group that are there, right? I'll extend that. Like your experience of holy might not be my experience of holy. Your backyard might not mean anything to me, but it might be the holiest place in the world for you. And yet, we also recognize that as a community, groups of people, families, tribes, people are able to say, this is a sacred place. Yeah, there's something about the experience there. Yeah. Who else? Who else would answer that? Are some places more holy than others? Who else? Does anybody want to say no? Anybody want to say no? I want to say no. I'm not sure how to explain it, but I want to say no only because I think the experience is relative. But I don't know. I don't know that your backyard is any more or less sacred than the altar at St. Paul's, except that we treat it differently. I don't know. What's a thin place? Anyway, so if you want to stick with yes, and I saw a couple sort of wiggles, so maybe I'm not alone in that, but teach me, help me understand what makes a place, whether it's a city, a town, a shrine, a hill, a tree, or a building, or something else, structure or otherwise. What is it that makes a place holy? Yeah.
Well, the reason why I didn't answer before was more because the first thing that came to mind is like a cemetery, some place that you're going to treat with respect.
Yeah.
And so, but it's not specifically holy ground when we look at a cemetery, but going back to when Jesus was buried in the tomb, and then when you said a shrine, the first thing that came to my mind is that this event that happened there. So if I stick to the cemetery or the death, you see many crosses on the roads where that's where life was changed.
Yes.
For the lack of sounding gloom and doom.
No, I think that's a great insight, where life was changed. Yeah, say more, yeah.
So that's what comes to my mind, and that's why sometimes some places are regarded as I don't want to call it special, but not holy. I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you. Ray's got a follow up. Who else has a remark? Molly as well after that. Thank you.
Can you tell us why you used the phrase thin space?
Why I use the place thin space? Well, I'll tell you why I used it, though I don't speak with any sort of universal or general authority on that. Thin space meaning a place in which our encounter of the divine, the otherworldly, the transcendent, feels a little more proximate, is a little more accessible. The experience is more accessible. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's how I would use it. Others who would use that differently. Molly and then Deb. We'll follow it with Deb. We'll start with Molly and then Deb. Also, before Molly speaks, if you didn't get a handout, they're by the coffee pot, the table on the other side of the coffee pot. Yeah, Molly.
I wanted to echo what she said over there. I think there's a human consensus when something is sacred and holy. I mean, if you think of the expanse of the human experience, and there's just too much. So there are things that we decide, and then we pass that down culturally.
Yes.
Like, St. Paul's tomb under the Vatican, or, just different places. And there are equally important historic locations that don't get, in my opinion, the recognition that they're due in the expanse of the human experience. That information's not passed down.
Yeah.
but I think it's not possible, so we pick and choose, and they're often those important moments that we mark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And then Deb, and then Eileen.
Well, I'm kind of struggling with this because, or just how to put it into words, because it seems to me, it kind of tagging onto what Molly said of, if I'm aware or if I'm connected to that place for some reason, or have that sense of God's presence there. So it's almost like it has to be a two-way street. You know, it can be that way, and if I'm not connected, I'm missing it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it. But.
Yeah, thank you. And Eileen, and then I'll move on to the next question with a follow-up. Yeah, Eileen.
Well, I have a question for you. It's about thin space. Can that be a sound?
Sure.
Because
sure.
what came to mind for me was when I was living in Iran, the call to prayer that went 5 times a day. At first, it was interesting, and then as I stayed there longer and longer, it became a connection to me with God and with everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I want to build on some of what I've heard, and I want to ask another hypothetical question, then I'll tell you a short story. Is there anything intrinsically holy about a physical place or structure that one might encounter even if one were completely ignorant of anything that had taken place there? So the story I'll tell you is a couple of summers ago, I was up at Swanee for a preaching class, and we went out into the woods, and we all kind of stood in this place. We kind of noticed it. And after we got there, the instructor told us that this was a part of the Trail of Tears. And the instructor invited us to notice how the earth was still sunken in just a little bit, the kind of road that had been walked down flat, compacted by all the feet that had walked on that place. And I wonder if my experience, surely the story shifted, changed, enhanced my experience of the holiness of that place. But I wonder if people randomly walking through the woods who walked on that track, if they would have any experience of the holiness of that space, even if there weren't any sign or any knowledge or any understanding of what might have happened there. I say yes. I don't know why. So let me follow it. What do you think? What can a place contain, hold, display holiness, even if the people in it have no idea why it's holy? Ray?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Ray says yes. Yeah. Yeah. Huh. Yeah. Susan?
I'll try to make this brief. But when we visited the Memorial for Justice and Peace in Montgomery, Alabama, it was hot that day and it was new. It was the fall, I think, after it had opened or something. And we walked up, and they have turnstile to go into, and I'm talking about the outdoor part, not the indoor museum part. And there was a very nice gentleman there, as greeting people. And there was a group of, I would say, youth, but old, young adults, I would say. And they had on hats, and the gentleman very gently said to them, "We consider this sacred ground. Would you remove your hat?" And it just suddenly got silent. And the silence never left the entire time we walked through that. And I'll do my plug for that place right now. Yeah. If you haven't been, you need to go.
Yeah.
But yes, I absolutely agree with you, because I'm not positive those young people knew why they were there. I semi-knew why I was there. I had no idea of the expanse of why I was there until I walked through it.
Yeah.
But yes, I would say yes.
Yes, and some people in the community are set apart for the work of inviting others to hear the story and to recognize it, right? That person who made that gentle comment. Part of their calling is to help people know what is already true, whether they know it or not. Yeah. Anybody else want to follow up with that hypothetical about the holiness of a place, whether we're aware of what's happened there or not? Yeah, Aubrey, up, and then who was first? Yep, and then Aubrey. Doesn't matter, you pick. Sorry.
When we went to Japan in 2019, we had the kids with us, and the whole time we were in Japan, we had to be quiet, and the kids were 7 and 9, so it was a little bit nerve-wracking as parents. But when we would go to the temples in Kyoto, it felt really holy. Obviously, it was built as a temple, and so you knew it was holy. But I tried to remove myself from being a Christian and taking that knowledge away from me. I would have, if I hadn't known God or my story of what I thought Christianity was, I would have definitely known that there was a higher power and not cared. And I still, after going there, I don't really have to have it defined so explicitly. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Because it was just, it didn't matter what country we were in. It just felt holy.
You knew it was holy.
Yeah.
Huh.
And of God.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and one more.
I don't always get my history right, whether it's Boston or Philly, but I was taking a tour through Philadelphia with a guide, and at the very end, she pointed across the street, Faneuil Hall, I think it is, just that and the other, where the Constitution was written and ratified. And I had a moment that I didn't expect to have. It's like, oh, this is where we all started as a country.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good, I'm not going to ask for answers in the interest of time, but that's a good way for me to invite you to think about the holiest place you've ever been. And I wonder if it surprises you that that's your answer. I bet many of us would say, this is the holy place I've been. And I'm actually kind of surprised that that's true, but it wouldn't be where I would have expected, but I know it, I felt it. Like you have a story to tell. Hold that, maybe share that story after church, over coffee hour, on your way to church. Let's read about some holy ground. And I wonder if somebody from the handout or from the screen, if somebody would read a part of Genesis that we heard in church not all that long ago, the burning bush, which is a bit of an understatement for the story. Who would read this bit of Genesis 3? And you'll notice we're using the Common English Bible again today. Who might read that for us, please? Thank you, David.
Moses was taking care of the flock for his father-in-law Jethro, Midian's priest. He led his flock out to the edge of the desert, and he came to God's mountain called Horeb. The Lord's messenger appeared to him in a flame of fire in the middle of a bush. Moses saw that the bush was in flames, but it didn't burn up. Then Moses said to himself, "Let me check out this amazing sight and find out why the bush isn't burning up." When the Lord saw that he was coming to look, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." Moses said, "I'm here." Then the Lord said, "Don't come any closer. Take off your sandals, because you are standing on holy ground." He continued, "I am the God of your father, Abraham's God, Isaac's God, and Jacob's God." Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, "I've clearly seen my people oppressed in Egypt. I've heard their cry of injustice because of their slave masters. I know about their pain. I've come down to rescue them from the Egyptians in order to take them out of that land and bring them to a good and broad land, a land that's full of milk and honey, a place where the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites all live. Now the Israelites' cries of injustice have reached me. I've seen just how much the Egyptians have oppressed them. So get going. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I to go to Pharaoh and to bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" God said, I'll be with you, and this will show you that I'm the one who sent you. After you bring the people out of Egypt, you will come back here and worship God on this mountain.
Thank you. Why did God tell Moses to take off his shoes? Why do we take off our shoes when we're on holy ground? What's that about? Respect? I heard respect. Yeah. It's a culturally familiar, not to all of us, but it's a fairly broad cultural familiarity to do that out of respect. Yeah. There was I think it was the ethicist in the New York Times, the ethicist column, where this, maybe a week or two ago, where there's a question about, like, sometimes a friend will ask me to take off my shoes when I get to their house, but I haven't had a chance to, have a pedicure or wash my feet, and I'm uncomfortable about that. How do I balance my discomfort? Because taking off my shoes is not my culture, but it's sometimes the culture of the person whose home I'll walk into. How do we balance that, right? How do we know, should I take off my hat because I recognize that this is a sacred place? Should I take off my hat because you recognize this is a sacred place? Or just because it's sacred in general? Anyway, just think about that. The deeper questions, though, the one I really want to hear you speak about, why is the sign that God gives Moses that he will return to worship God on this mountain? Right? So think about the chronology of that for just a moment. God says, Moses, go and do this thing. And Moses goes, who am I to do this? And he goes, here's the sign that it'll be okay. When it's all over and done with, you'll come back here and then you'll know. I want a different kind of stuff. So I'm just curious why that sign. It's not quite that simple. And actually, you might remember, and I've cut the story short, there's another sign. What if they ask who it is? I'll say, I am sent me. We're leaving that part out. But let me ask you, what's the significance of that strange chronology, the strange sign that Moses says, who am I? And God says, I will be with you, and this will be the sign that you and God's people will come back to this mountain to worship me. What's the significance of that coming back as a sign and as a story? Yeah. Deb, here comes that microphone.
First thing that comes to my mind is that it's a way for us to exercise faith and trust.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen until I do it, kind of thing.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. A priest friend of acquaintance of mine died this week after a long illness and bravely fought that publicly. Just shared her journey. And I've seen some just tributes and memorials and thoughts, and someone who's a dear friend of the one who has died shared on social media what I often hear said at the bedsides of those who are dying, I'll see you again. That's kind of confidence that not in this, I don't mean in this life, I mean we will be together again. And that's the expression of confidence that we offer. Yeah, faithfulness, and surely an act of faithfulness. Yeah. What else? What else is significant about that coming back, that you're going to come back and worship me on this mountain? What's significant about that? Yeah, up front.
Well, it was more about the feeling of to bring them home.
Yeah.
To bring them together, to bring them all together.
Yeah.
And the idea that it's not so much when he also said, I'm going to be there for you. It's more the sense of I'm going to use you for my good works. So you have to surrender, in a sense. So, but in the big picture is you'll come back with them to the home where they belong.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And to the home where God is found. I mean, I think a lot of this is, I honestly don't know how to answer the question that I've asked. I think a lot of it is about the concreteness, the physicality, the realness of God's presence, right? That this isn't just an abstract promise, and it's not just you'll come back here, but you'll come back here to this place where I have shown up, God, has shown up in a profound way. There's something holy about this mountain, right? Moses says, I must turn aside and see this thing and why the bush is not burned up. And I love the way the CEB puts it in what feels like just sort of just surprisingly clear language. When God saw that he was coming to look, God called to him. It's like God said, all right, I got him. Moses, right? There's this wonderful something. It's a thin place, right? There's something about God's presence in this physical place and the invitation back to that thing, that place. That makes me, of course, leads me to the last question. Like, what is God meaning when God says, when you go to Pharaoh, I will be with you? I think there's a tension between I will be with you and yet you'll meet me again here on this mountain. I think God is trying to tell Moses and us something about where God is to be found. Yeah, Karen.
I think it demonstrates that God's work begins and ends with a connection with Moses being with him.
Yeah. Some of y'all will remember Dusty and Angie McIver, a fairly young couple. They lived here. He's an optometrist. Anyway, they were active in this church, and they were married in Louisiana where they've got family connections, but they got enough family connections here that they had already become a part of this church, and this became their home. So they had a second wedding reception here in the space, probably about 2009 or so. She died unexpectedly a couple of weeks ago, and yesterday they had another celebration in this space, even though they now live in Nebraska. But they wanted to be in this space again. That family wanted to be in this space. And even though this was the space where they celebrated a wedding and are now in some ways celebrating the end of that marriage, the end of her life, there was a real wholeness that this physical space added. I'd never met them before I got that phone call, before they came, but the family wanted to be here, back in the place where in some ways that had started. It's a powerful sense of beginning and ending. Yeah. What else would you make of that? What is God let me ask it this way. How might God be surprising Moses by saying, I will be with you, and when you come back here, you'll worship me on this mountain again? That might not be what you wanted to say, Trent, but that's what's on your mind?
Well, I don't know. Just this whole conversation is reminding me a little bit of the sacraments that are particular places where we have been promised we can encounter God. But yet, I think they also, in a way, wake us up to God's presence everywhere.
Yeah. Yes.
So there's a tension there, that recognizing that we need specific places where we can trust that God will be encountered, and yet, in a way, they make us where the goal is to not need them to a certain degree.
Yeah. Is God with me at Starbucks on Sunday morning when I'm not in church and I'm just having a cup of coffee, reading the paper? Sure. Is God as much present in Starbucks as God is at the altar of St. Paul's? I believe it. Believe it 100%. And yet there's something about what we experience here that then allows Starbucks to become sacred. In a way. Yeah, right? Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's a bold theological statement being made in this story about where God is to be found. Let's leave that question partially unanswered until we look at the second bit, which I think makes it even stranger. I love this story, and I tried to cut it to make it shorter, but I just couldn't figure out a way to cut it. So whether from your handout or from the screen, would somebody read for us, please, this bit from 2 Kings 5 about Naaman or Naaman, however you want to say it, and Elisha. Who would read the story? Rebecca's going to read it for us up front. Thank you.
Naaman, a general for the king of Aram, was a great man, highly regarded by his master, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man was a mighty warrior, but he had a skin disease. Now the Aramean raiding parties had gone out and captured a young girl from the land of Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, I wish my master could come before the prophet who lives in Samaria. He could cure him of this disease. So Naaman went, told his master that the young girl from the land of Israel said, and the Aram's king said, "Go ahead. I will send a letter to Israel's king." So Naaman left. He took 10 kikars of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. He brought the letter to Israel's king, and it read, "Along with this letter, I'm sending you my servant Naaman, so you can cure him of his skin disease." When the king of Israel read the letter, he ripped his clothes. He said, "What? Am I God to hand out death and life? But this king writes me, asking me to cure someone of his skin disease. You must realize he wants to start a fight with me." When Elijah, the man of God, heard that Israel's king had ripped his clothes, he sent word to the king, "Why do you rip your clothes? Let the man come to me. Then he'll know there is a prophet in Israel." Naaman arrived with his horses and chariots. He stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent out a messenger who said, "Go, wash 7 times in the Jordan River, and then your skin will be restored and become clean." But Naaman went away in anger, and he said, "I thought for sure he would come out, stand, call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the bad spot, and cure the skin disease. Aren't the rivers in Damascus, the Abana and the Pharpar, far better than all of Israel's waters? Couldn't I wash in them and get clean?" So he turned away and proceeded to leave in anger. Naaman's servants came up to him and spoke to him. "Our father, if the prophet had told you something difficult, wouldn't you have done it? All he said to you was wash, become clean." So Naaman went down and bathed in the Jordan 7 times, just as the man of God had said. And his skin was restored like that of a young boy, and he became clean. He returned to the man of God and all his attendants, and he came and he stood before Elijah, saying, "Now I know for certain there's no God anywhere on earth except in Israel. Please accept a gift from your servant." But Elisha said, "I swear by the life of the Lord I serve that I won't accept anything." Naaman urged Elisha to accept something, but he still refused. Then Naaman said, "If not, then let me, your servant. I have 2 mule loads of earth. Your servant will never again offer entirely burnt offerings or sacrifices to any other god except the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master comes into Rimon's temple to bow down there and is leaning on my arm, I must also bow down in Rimon's temple. When I bow down in Rimon's temple, may the Lord forgive your servant from doing that." And Elisha said to him, "Go in peace."
Thank you. I love that story. Why does Naaman ask Elisha to let him take 2 carts full of dirt back with him from Israel back to Aram, where he's going home? Like, why does he say, "Let me take some dirt back with me"? What is it about that dirt? He's going to build a place to stand on, and a place to do what in particular? To remember, and I would go even one step further. I would say to worship. Yeah. I think when he says, "Now I know for certain there is no God anywhere on earth except in Israel," would you do me a favor and let me take back 2 Israel dirts, two truckloads of Israeli dirt? So I can bring it. So I can bring what with me? I can bring God, like a connection with God with me. It's pretty common, and we probably have some still in a cabinet somewhere. It's pretty common for people who visit Palestine to come back with vials of water from the Jordan River. And in some churches, they'll put a couple of drops in the baptismal font whenever we do a baptism, because there's something, there's just a connection there. That is not our practice. Has anybody been to the River Jordan where Jesus is said to have been baptized? I've never been. I'm told it's not all that pretty. It's kind of smelly and not great. Kind of what Naaman would say. Aren't all the rivers in Damascus better than these waters in Israel? And yet it's holy. We recognize it's holy. Holy things happen there, right? And but surely the water itself isn't magic. And yet, like there's power in that memory. There's power in that connection. Is there Is there power in the water? Is there power in the dirt? Is it just the memory of the dirt? Like this is a larger than life story, and it would be a shame if we dissected it and left with only the pieces laid out on the table, right? So I don't want us to strip it of its power, but I just want us to encounter the beautiful strangeness of it. Yeah, Trent, help us hear what you're hearing in this story. Yeah.
Okay, so I grew up Methodist, but went to Catholic schools, and now I'm Episcopalian.
Welcome.
And the whole debate over real presence, which is significant.
Yeah.
And yet some of my Catholic brethren feel the need to come up with a scientific explanation for why there is real presence in the Eucharist, and once it's digested, then that presence is gone. But as long as there's just a molecule of it in your stomach, Christ's presence is within.
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of like just real presence and not having to give it a super scientific, pick it apart explanation. And that's what I hear us talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'd be disappointed if somebody said it's just water, it's just dirt. But I'd also be stretched a little too far if somebody said, "Oh, this is magic dirt." Right? I mean, right? But I join you in that beautiful place that I so often encounter in this community, which is in the middle, which is, oh, it's holy. I don't know how. I don't know why. But it's holy. And it's not just holy because the people recognize. I think it's more than just psychology. But anyway, but I'm joining you in that. Yeah. What else? Yeah, Rebecca. You're going to get your steps in today, which is nice. It's a gift. Yeah. And it's a gift to us. Thank you, Elizabeth.
What I keep hearing is it's interaction of our consciousness with space. It's the setting apart and the time. One of the reasons you take your shoes off is because it's physical interaction and space given.
Yeah.
But that's what I keep hearing. It's space and time. And then I keep thinking about a busy highway where there's been a death and there's a cross. And for most folks, it's a busy highway. But for some of us, when you step aside, take a minute, interact, then that is the alchemy of the sacredness.
Ooh, I like that. I'm going to borrow that in a future sermon. The alchemy of sacredness. I like that. Yeah.
And I would just add to that sometimes in order for us to really acknowledge something, we have to have some action with it. We're materialistic, we're in the sense of the shoes, taking off the shoes, taking off the hat. It's like you have to show the respect in one action.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, when something really means a lot to you, you want to bring something with you, right? I mean, even if we just go on a simple vacation and that one place was, it was the first time you ever saw anything wonderful, you want to bring something back with you just to remember it. And in this day and age of mobile phones and easy pictures, there's so many memories I remember, but I don't have a picture of it.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of in between the two worlds is what I'm trying to say. It's like you have to trust in God. You have to have faith in what you don't see or touch, but we're still here and we need something to see and touch.
Yeah. What happens when we see and touch that thing so often that we almost forget that it's sacred? Right? Isn't there a danger? Isn't there a danger if you live in Rome and you worship in the Vatican every single day of the week that you might just one day not notice how holy or beautiful it is? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe not. Magdalene Serenity House, y'all know Magdalene Serenity House, our partners in ministry. They do such good work. As Magdalene Serenity House was getting its start, Becca Stevens, founder of Thistle Farms, came. She was here. She preached here. You might have noticed she always takes off her shoes every time she preaches. Like, she stands in the pulpit barefoot every time because that's holy ground. I wonder if that helps, that little gesture, even if it becomes rote, helps us encounter the sacred in the midst of the familiar. Yeah. Does God need us to have that physical connection? Do we need that physical connection? What's the balance? Using the image of the story, right? Naaman asks for the earth. He then says, look, I will never worship another God other than the God of Israel. Only to the God of Israel, the Lord, will I offer these sacrifices, offerings. But please, would you forgive me because I have to go in the temple, and because my master, the king, is feeble, when he bows, I have to bow too, even just to get him down. Is it like, would you excuse me? Like, think about the way that would you excuse me the physical appearance of worship, which I promise isn't where my heart is. It's just because I have a job to do. Like, the technicality, the specificity, the concern that Naaman offers, the peace that Elisha gives him. My question is, with that kind of immediate, the fact that such an excuse, such a justification would need to be made, what does that tell you about Naaman's encounter with God? Where Naaman, and maybe by extension some of his contemporaries, what's the nature of his relationship with the God of Israel that kind of specificity, which I bristle at, becomes necessary? Yeah. I didn't ask that very well, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say. Yeah, Ray, thank you.
Naaman is a very subtle mind. He's a chief general of the king of Syria. He has a very intelligent advisor who tells him, well, if the prophet told you to do something really hard, you've done it, so why are you so upset?
Yeah.
And he's very concerned about keeping his job and yet not blaspheming. So I just think he's a very subtle, this is one of the most interesting political stories in the Bible.
Yes.
But my question for you is, doesn't our religion teach that all places on earth can be holy, and that the land of Israel is perhaps a talisman and a distraction from the larger mission of our church?
Maybe. I mean, I maybe. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe. Maybe. Yeah, Clint and then Trent. Cliff and then Trent.
It seems like this whole story is dealing with people who are trying to listen to find out what the sacredness is all about and doing an action that they're called to do. And then when they return, it's like, so this is what God feels like.
Huh. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe it will help me understand it a little bit more and see the power.
Yeah.
Feel the power.
What will help us bring that with us? Right? What will help me return to that? Right? I'm told that taking a picture of your meal, a fancy meal, doesn't actually help you either enjoy the meal in the moment or enjoy it later. Actually, you're better off just letting your memory have that. But I also know that when I share an experience with someone and we can tell that story and retell that story, that helps me experience it. So I think there are some effective ways to bring that mountaintop experience down the mountain with us back into ordinary life. I'm not sure a selfie is the best way to do that. I'm actually not sure that a bucket load of dirt is the best way to do that. But there's something about that desire. That you help me see that desire in Naaman, which I also experience in my own way. Yeah, Trent.
I was just thinking of the line, you can't go home again. You can't go home again. And I'm thinking of going, my parents, we sold their house to some dear friends of theirs. And I remember one of the first times I went home there and opened the screen door, the sound of it squeaking just took me back immediately, to all those feelings and thoughts. But on the other hand, I went back to a childhood place where I'd lived that was very sacred to me. But they had torn down the club where we used to swim. A lot of the quaint old houses had been knocked down and big houses had been put up, and it was not the same.
Yeah.
It did not hold that power.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just, it's strange.
Yeah. Well, let me offer some concluding thoughts as we finish. I think both of these stories wrestle with the idea that God is to be found in a particular place. I think Naaman's comment, I know that there's no God anywhere except in Israel, which is why I got to take some dirt back, because I want to have a connection with God, and I can't have it without this dirt. There's a tension between that understanding and the idea that there is one God, the God who is everywhere, in all things. so many of the prohibitions and warnings given to the people of Israel as they move into this promised land is, look, you're going to get there and the weather's going to be bad and you're going to be tempted to pray to the gods of the people who are already in the land. Don't marry them, don't pray to them, don't adopt their practices. I am with you. I was with you in Egypt, I was with you in the wilderness, I'm going with you into Palestine. The Queen, we've talked about this before, the King of England. Now, the King of England, when he's in England, he's an Anglican, Episcopalian, but when he goes to Scotland, he becomes a Presbyterian, just like that. Because the Scottish Kirk is, the Presbyterian Kirk is the established church in Scotland, and the Church of England, the Anglican Church in England. So as soon as he crosses the border, he becomes a Presbyterian, which is just funny to think about, right? But in an analogous way, in an ancient world or culture, like when you enter a new land, you need to say, all right, who are the gods here? Because I want to make sure that I pray to the right God, the God who shows up, the God who will bring rain on my fields, who will protect me from the enemies and heal my children when they're sick. And the challenge for us is to realize that actually, and it's not just geographical, but actually it is the God, the one God, who is manifest in the burning bush, manifest in the healing in the river, manifest in the deliverance from slavery in Egypt and through the Red Sea and sustenance, that God is with us wherever we go. And it's a really hard thing for us to make that connection. And I think the power and the importance of physical place is real and it's to be pursued. And yet at the same time, we have to remember that God is no more present in the nave at St. Paul's than God is in the classroom at Washington Elementary School or at your dining room table. That's a hard connection to make. And yet we've been trying for several thousand years to figure that out. I want us to kind of continue to explore the holiness of place, and yet recognize that the peculiar experience of the holiness of place is real and powerful, and yet not limited only to particular place. And that invites another response, which the second question is, we don't have time to hear answers, but I want you to go away thinking, how might I have reverence for the earth as Moses and Naaman did? Real, faithful reverence, not superstitious, I'm going to take some dirt home with me, but such a powerful experience of God who inhabits place, physical place, earth. So real an encounter that we could even take 2 mule carts of dirt with us because we want that experience. How can that reverence follow us wherever we go? Thank you all for being here today. Next week, we will come back and we will look at the Lord's house and we'll talk about what happens on that mountaintop when God's people gather together. Appreciate y'all being here and I hope to see you next week. Thanks.